Part 3, Brian, of our linebacker discussion. We are going to talk about kind of the knowns, the strengths, and then the unknowns or the question marks about this group, right? And so with so many new faces, and we kind of talked about that in the last part, but there's a lot of unknowns. There's no doubt with all these new faces and guys playing in different positions, and with the guys leaving to go to the NFL, there's a lot of unknowns. But with that said, there's also a decent amount of knowns as well. And one of those major knowns, and we talk about it a bunch, is it's funny because you kind of got this group of guys who are freshmen, sophomores, you got a junior, and then you got Jack Kaiser,
Uncle
who's
Jack.
Yeah, you got Grandpa Uncle Jack or
Uncle Jack.
Uncle Jack.
He ain't that old, man.
All right, fair enough. So you got Uncle Jack over here, who's a 6th-year senior who comes back, and honestly, what a huge coup for Notre Dame to get him to come back, because he could have gone off and done whatever and been super successful in whatever he was trying to do. But to bring him back
in the NFL draft, I think he'll be drafted.
Yeah.
I do. I think they might have had 3 starting linebackers drafted last year.
Exactly.
But Jack would have gone, because Jack's going to test really well.
Yes, because he's super athletic. There's no doubt about it. But to get him to come back and bring his leadership back and his knowledge of the defense and his just knowledge of life in general, having him in that room is going to make a huge difference to this team and to this room specifically.
He's kind of a question mark as far as how he's going to go to Will, but there's 2 things we know about Jack Kaiser. Number one is he's going to be a leader of the defense. He gives that linebacker room a presence. He knows he's made the mistakes. He's also had the successes. He kind of knows this is how you prepare for like a professional, right? This is how you go about your business. Not only has he done it, but he also was teammates with JD Bertrand last year, Drew White.
Yeah.
Before that, right? Who was also a very smart, heady, prepare the right way. You don't have the success that Drew White has if you don't know how to prepare, because he was a much smaller guy. Now, Drew was a solid athlete as well, not as athletic as JD and Jack, but he was he ran a 4.6 something at his pro day. He just was 6 foot 225. I mean, but he knew how to prepare. He knew how to go through film. He knew how to get his teammates lined up. So Jack's had some good mentors. And then, of course, he was on the team for 2 seasons with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? Because Jack, I believe, was a 2019 signee with Notre Dame, correct? Mm-hmm. So 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Yeah. So, I mean, he's seen some things in his time at Notre Dame. You know what I mean?
That's one way to put it.
And, he's one of the few guys on the defense that was played in the college football playoff game. There aren't a lot of those guys left from that team anymore either. And so he's going to bring you a lot of experience, a lot of leadership, which is very, very important. And he's also going to bring you a lot of versatility. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of people talking about, they need to get Drake and Kingston on the field together and Jalen Seed. Okay, that's fine. But let's say you get to a point in time where you're like, look, Drake and Kingston are 2 of our best linebackers. We have to play them. So what do you do with Jack Kaiser? Well, you're not going to put him on this bench? No, you're not. You're going to move him back out to Rover.
Yeah.
At times you could do that. And so the fact that he can play, Jack Kaiser in his career has started games at Mike and Rover. And this year he will start games at Will. So by the time we get to the Texas A&M game, that will be the 3rd position that Jack Kaiser started a game at in his Notre Dame career. So you can do a lot of things with him, which allows you to say, hey, if there are some looks where we think we need these 2 guys in the field in our base defense against this particular team, doesn't mean we got to take Jack off the field, because you can do a lot of different things with Jack. And so having that type of versatility and leadership in your room is important, because if Jack leaves, think about this. If Jack Kaiser would have left to go pro, Jalen Sneed is significantly the oldest and most experienced player at linebacker.
That's crazy.
And that's not a knock on Jalen. He just hasn't played a ton of linebacker, but he's played 100%. Way more than everybody else.
100%.
So that's kind of what I'm referring to. There's a huge lack of experience behind Jack Kaiser. So having that presence is important. Having that someone who, when Drake Bowen is going to make mistakes. Kingston is going to make mistakes. And if you know those 2 guys at all, especially Drake, he may be prone to get down on himself a little bit for that minute. And Jackson be right there to be like, you know what, dude, move on. Let's do it. The freshmen are going to make mistakes. Jalen Snead's going to make a mistake. And their reaction to it is going to be important, but you've got a guy there now that's going to make sure that that room is responding the right way to things. There's just all types of reasons why it's important to have a guy that is as experienced and versatile as Jack Kaiser at the position.
Yeah,
it's very important
on and off the field. I mean, he brings so much to this room on and off the field, and you're going to see it. I mean, if you are going to compliment, any of the young guys for their, maybe maturity beyond their years or, anything like that, some of that has to go to Jack Kaiser. I mean, in my opinion, because he is that leader. He's the guy that they're all looking up to. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the group success, I think, will, you throw that a little bit his way. You throw a little bit, obviously, the coaching staff, and obviously you throw a little bit to the actual players themselves and talking. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to transition to our next point.
Well, now let me finish up.
Yeah.
The other part, too, is when you have a guy like Jack Kaiser, there comes a point in time where you just don't have to coach him as much.
That's a good point.
And when you don't have to coach him as much, especially on the field, right? You're still coaching him up in the film room and preparation. But I mean, just like you don't have to get on him about how to go through a drill and technique and things like that as much. That means you can spend more time with the other guys.
There's less to worry about. Yeah.
You can coach really Jack up off film a little bit more than you need to like on the field.
Right.
Especially, I mean, spring was a little different because he is making that transition to more of a full-time inside guy. But that also means, Max Bullock doesn't have to use it. And he's a great example because he's always the first guy going through drills. You know what a drill is going to look like. Well, Coach, what do you want me to do here? Watch Jack.
Yeah.
That right there. That's what I want. You know what I mean? And that's something that's been helpful too. And you can see it too. Like he'll go through a drill and you can see Merritt, you can see Drake and Kingston and Jalen are all just right there locked in on Jack. And then that boom, they jump in and get over to it as well. So, those are aspects of it that you look and say, it's good to have a guy there that can handle that because it allows you to focus on other things.
Right.
It's huge.
Having those veterans are absolutely, I mean, as a coach, having veterans on the team that know what you expect, know how to get drills done, know, again, what to expect from a practice day, from start to finish and all of that stuff. Having a veteran being able to be there takes so much pressure off of a position coach or a head coach or what have you. It's massive. And he is the epitome of what a veteran is, right? And he's a guy that you have no problem having other guys follow. Now, there's plenty of other guys that could, and I'm not saying on Notre Dame specifically, I'm saying in general, there's plenty of other veterans out there that you're like, I don't know if I want my young guys, following his, what he does on and off the field. But Jack is not that guy. So you can kind of rest assured and rest easy that that's the case. And the guys that he's leading, by the way, Bryan, and himself included, are, moving along with the knowns and what we know about this group is they are incredibly athletic, and this group as a whole is deeper than I remember having in the past. Not necessarily from a number standpoint, but from a number standpoint in that a lot of these guys could contribute if they had to, or if they wanted to, I think is the better way to put it.
You know who's going to love this group more than maybe even more than Max Bullock, to your point about because you're talking about athleticism and depth. I'm looking at the super chat we got from Beefeater. Thank you for the super chat, by the way. But he says, love the linebacker talk today. Anytime for special teams. Vince, with your unique view of the kicking world, what are the more subtle advantages of a punter with a 5-second hang time versus the NFL average of 4.4 seconds? So we'll get into that here at the end of this deal. But when I first saw special teams, I saw LB and special teams. I'm sitting there thinking, like, who's going to love this group?
Oh, Marty Biaggi.
It's Marty Biaggi.
Yeah, that's a great call.
I mean, look, right now, Anthony Knapp might be – not Anthony Knapp. Teddy Rizak might be if you had to put your linebackers on a list, 1 through, they got 3 freshmen. You've got Drake, Preston, and I'm completely drawing a blank on Jaden Osbury. Duh. You got Jalen Snead and Jack Kaiser. So that's 8 linebackers, right? Because Kahanu's out. Scholarship linebackers. If you're going to put them 1 through 8, you probably put Teddy Rizak 8th right now. because he's skinny. He's got to fill out a lot, like, but you're like, but that dude runs a 4.5.
Right.
I mean, he runs a low 4.5. Like, that's the lowest guy on your list. And he's almost 6'4". Bodie Cahoon, 6'2.5", 6'3", 225, 230. Drake Bowen, 6'2", 240. Kingston, 6'3", 240. Preston Zinner, who we don't talk about, 4 or 5 years ago, we're talking about him maybe battling for a starting job, and we don't even mention him like right now, which we probably should. Like, this is a group, like, Preston Zinner may not play meaningful downs at linebacker, but if he's not starting on at least 2 or 3 special teams, I don't know what's going on anymore.
Right.
Like, that's something that you bring to the table, Vince. And it's one of those things where not all these guys can help you at linebacker, but other guys can help you over here in other ways.
Well, there's only so many spots, right? And so many snaps.
You can't play 7 linebackers in a game.
Right.
You just can't. But those guys that aren't can still help this football team win games. And that's well on special teams. So yes, it's an athletic deep group. There's a lot of potential. And why does that matter? Why is it important to be focused on the known? Because give me young guys that may not know what they're doing all the time that are really talented, because eventually they're going to know what they're supposed to do. Eventually they're going to learn what they're supposed to go do. If you're a 4.9 40, knowing where you're supposed to go doesn't make you a 4.5. If you're a 4.5 and you don't know where to go, you may play like a 4.9.
Yeah, right.
But when you figure it out, you're back to playing like a 4.5. You know what I'm saying? And you look at a guy like the kid that NC State had this past year, Peyton Wilson. Peyton Wilson didn't always look like he looked this year. Now, he's always been talented. He's always been athletic. He's always had those tools, but he didn't always produce like he did this past season, and even when he was healthy. Why? Well, because he didn't always know what he's supposed to do. And as he figured out the defense, that's why in his last 3 healthy years, he was a 10-plus tackle for loss every guy. Didn't look like that as a freshman, but then eventually figured out because he's really talented. And that's the thing is, give me guys that are talented, and then it's my job to get them ready to go. But look, no matter how hard you try, you are not going to make Joe Schmidt 6'3". You're not going to make Joe Schmidt 240, and you're not going to have Joe Schmidt run a 4.5 or a 4.6.
Wish you could have.
Wish you could have.
Love that kid. Well, loved it. Yeah.
But Drake Bowen can learn the defense
right
the way that Joe Schmidt did, right? Like, that's the difference. And then be 6'2", 6'2.5", 240, and be able to run. Kingston is already 6'3" and 240 and can run. Right. Now he's just got to learn the defense. Jalen Sneed is 6'2", 225, and can fly and is explosive. Jaden Alsbury, same thing, 6'2", 215, 220, athletic. Bodie Cahoon, 6'3". You see what I'm saying, Vince? Like, give me those long athletic guys that are talented, and then they can learn the defense.
Right.
So having that foundation is very important. There's no doubt about it. And then that leads into the third part. These two things kind of tie together. Right.
And that third part is the playmaking potential of this group and what they're going to be able to do. And we talk about the highs and the lows and all of that. And of course, the highs being, TFLs and sacks and, just stuffs, right? I mean, stuffing your gap, whatever you're responsible for, flying to the football, all of those things, those playmaking things that we have talked about ad nauseum about, they haven't made those plays enough in the past. They've made some, and they've been in position to make others, but they haven't consistently made those plays. So those are the ups. And then you've got the downs of maybe, making a wrong read and things of that nature. The goal here, Bryan, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but the goal here is that the ups are far outnumber the downs. I mean, there's going to be downs. Like, we need to prepare people for that. There's going to be downs. I mean, this is a young group.
Don't like it, but it's just a reality.
It's just reality, exactly. But you want those ups to far outshadow and outweigh the downs, right? And like you said earlier, which I think is fantastic, is like you hope that the running back that has bad vision when you make it down, that's every coach's dream when that happens as a defensive coach, right?
The quarterback pulls and throws the RPO into coverage. You're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God that guy's an idiot, because we'd have been so screwed. Yeah.
Given because it was wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that this group can make plays. We've seen them make plays. Can they do it on a consistent basis? Can those plays far outnumber the other plays?
Yeah. And that's, again, I'm gonna talk about this. That's not just true on offense. I mean, on defense, right? This is also true on special teams, and that's kind of what we're getting at. It's also true on special teams because you go look at, Drake Bowen really only played one game of meaningful snaps last year, but what did he do in that game? He had a safety. Go back and watch that play. He didn't get credit for it, I don't believe, but Drake Bowen's the guy that stoned that play and resulted in the safety off the bench. You talk about Prince Colley never panned out at Notre Dame as a linebacker.
Right.
But he was a
heck of a special teams player.
He, in 2022, for example, he blocked the punt.
Yep.
But he also scooped and scored a punt against Clemson and what really broke that game open and was a very good coverage player and all that type of thing. So, yeah, he never panned out, as a linebacker, but the guy was a pretty darn good special teams player for Notre Dame last season. And so, yeah, you need those kind of guys, Vince. I mean, that's the reality is you playmaking. If you've got that level of athleticism and talent that can result in playmaking ability, it doesn't just impact you on defense.
Right. Absolutely.
There's a reason that special teams are usually filled with linebackers and safeties and corners. It's because those are the guys that are the most athletic, run down the field, hit and tackle people. Now, sometimes you'll have a running back or receiver that does that because they can run downfield, hit and tackle. By and large, though, it's defensive players.
Sure.
And as I've shared the story before, I have a buddy who's a special teams coordinator at the Power 5 level, and he coached against Notre Dame a few years ago. And he's like, dude, it was hell defending Notre Dame. He actually went against them, I think, twice at two different schools. But, he was like, it was hell going against Notre Dame because they got a bunch of 230-pound linebackers that run 4.5s. I mean, how do you – when you're at my school, how do you defend that?
Right, exactly.
You just cross your fingers and hope. And, he schemed them up and stuff like that and made sure that they didn't take the game over as best he could. But, it's just one of those things where you look at it and say, man, this group's going to make a lot of plays this year. Jalen Snead's going to make plays on defense. How many? We'll see, but he's going to make plays. But I won't be shocked if he makes plays on special teams as well. Same with Kingston. I mean, it wouldn't shock. Would it shock me if I told you at the end of the year the two biggest plays Kingston's going to make all year are going to be on special teams? Would that shock you? Be like a blocked punt or a blocked field goal or a swoop and score or something like that.
Honestly, it would make perfect sense to me because that's exactly the role that I think he's going to be. Now, he's going to play defense. Exactly. Don't get me wrong. He's going to play defense.
It's the game-changing play, the recovering a fumble for a touchdown. That's, it's maybe on special teams instead of on defense. He's going to do his job and have 5 tackles for loss or whatever on defense. But it's more about like that game-changing. He's going to make more game-changing potential to make more game-changing plays on special teams this year than he would on defense, I would imagine.
Yes. Completely agree.
And that's why that's an important thing to talk about when you're talking about this group.
Yes, no question. They're going to be huge on special teams, and it's so incredibly important, to the success of this team. So I'm very excited about that part. Let's transition to kind of the concerns or questions or unknowns, however you want to phrase it. But we kind of touched on it when we were talking about the knowns and the strengths, right? And its assignment correctness. And, I mentioned you want the playmaking potential to outweigh the assignment correctness, but with so many new faces and so much, let's be honest, outside of Jack Kaiser, it's a youth movement. At linebacker, it's a youth movement. So, you have to anticipate that there are going to be mistakes, but you want to have those mistakes as limited as you possibly can. And so how limited can you make those assignment mistakes early and then decrease them as the year goes on? That's a question. We don't know where that line is in game 1 and where it's going to end up being in game 12.
If you tell me, hey, they're going to be good against A&M, but the next 3 games are going to struggle, I'll take that.
100%.
You just hope that it doesn't happen in the opener, right? That's the thing. You just don't want to give up that one bad backside zone run fit where you over pursue because you want to make a play and you don't respect the backside B gap or the backside A gap.
You give up like a 60-yard run for a touchdown.
Yes, Ruben Owens cuts it back and rips it for a 50-yard touchdown. Like those are the things you have to avoid. You lose contain on the backside. Sure. Connor Wegman keeps it, runs it for 30 yards. You just can't have those mistakes. You can't give up the cheap yards. And that's what they're going to have to avoid as best they can and limit those plays. And how quickly can they become experienced vets? That's going to be a big thing. And that's on them to put in the work and be prepared, but it's also a lot of it's going to come down to Max Bulla as the position coach. And then also Al Golden saying, hey, look, I don't have JD Bertrand at linebacker this year. So I can't coach like I've got JD and then get mad if my young guys can't do it. I've got to coach like I got really talented young guys, and then push them and coach them and teach them and get them going as fast as you can. But make sure, especially in that first game, like if Al Golden wants to get experimental in weeks 2 and 4, go for it, brother.
Yeah.
Like
that's the time to experiment.
Right.
And that's also the time to get right, and all of those different things. And we've talked about that a million times, get right games and, things of that nature. You still take them seriously and you still, scheme to win and all of those things. But game 1, you just hope those things don't nip you in the butt. Right. I mean, that's the biggest thing is you can't have those massive mistakes, and you can't like all 3 of you guys make a mistake on the same play.
Right. Yes.
That's part of it too.
The other thing too, Vince, is when you look at the linebackers, we've talked about this before. I actually think they're going to get triggered more this year than they did last year.
Okay.
And in football terms, triggered is a good thing. Triggered is like you're really triggering them to attack. It's a blitz, it's a run stunt, something like that. They're triggered on that play. Who's triggered? Is it the Mike, the Will? That kind of thing. So it's a good thing. You're going to use them. I think it's because what that does is it's going to say, hey, listen, on this play, you're attacking this. There's no read. It's you go here.
Yeah.
You also have to be careful that you're correct on those things as well, because if you don't, hey, we brought you thinking we're going to get to the quarterback. If you hit the wrong gap and you get blocked, now do we not get to the quarterback, but we have less guys in coverage now. So it's not even just like read, react, and flow. And it's also like, hey, man, we're bringing you. You're supposed to go through the B gap. You went through the A gap. So guess what? You lost. The quarterback stepped up to the left, ran through that B gap, which was now vacated. And, he ran for 15 yards on 3rd and 9. You've got to also make sure that you're not making those mistakes as well. So that's going to be a big question mark. And I'm not saying they're going to make a bunch of those mistakes. I'm saying they're going to make some mistakes. It's not okay to go out there and have every third play is is an MA. You can't have that. That's not what we're talking about. But you've got to still perform at a high level. You just have to limit those as much as possible. And then the other thing that's going to be a key for these players is can you don't make the same mistake over and over and over and over and over.
Yes, exactly. Learn from your mistakes.
Right.
It's just like having kids. It's one thing to make a mistake. Cool. Learn from your mistake and don't make it again. Like that's the biggest thing. I can forgive a mistake, even as a coach, I can forgive a mistake. It's if you are continuously making that mistake in practice and we coach it up and we coach it up and we coach it up, and then you do the same thing in the game and you do it again in the game. Like that's where we start having a different kind of a conversation, right? You can't continuously make
that conversation is going to be, you're going to have a great view of the game this weekend.
Yes.
Right beside me.
As Bobby and I would say, splinters are the best coach sometimes. And I'm sure I butchered that quote, but you get the idea, you get the picture. And so, absolutely. It's learning from those mistakes. Because look, mistakes are going to happen. I can't stress that enough. Mistakes are going to happen. But you have to learn from your mistakes and not make those same ones over and over again.
Right.
And that kind of goes back to the depth that we talked about earlier. If that ends up being the case for somebody, there's going to be somebody nipping at their heels to take over. Those reps aren't sacred to one guy. And so that's where depth comes into play. And that's where, guys make guys better, basically. The iron sharpens iron cliche. I mean, it's true. Guys are going to be nipping at your heels. They're going to be playing their best ball, and they're going to force you to play your best ball. And so that's going to be super important as well. Tackling, Bryan, is something that I kind of have a love-hate relationship when it comes to football these days in 2024, whether it's at the peewee level, the high school level, the college level, the pro level. Like, tackling's not great these days. It just isn't. And that's just the world we live in because of the lack of hitting in practice and all of those different things. But tackling just has to be better in general, and that goes for everybody, but it also goes for Notre Dame and it goes for these linebackers as well. And obviously these guys weren't necessarily playing a bunch last year, but tackling from the linebacker position needs to be better. It just does. I mean, there were opportunities that were not met last year sometimes because of lack of tackling.
I would argue they were not saying that you're not saying this. They were much better tacklers last year than they were the year before.
Fair.
And my concern is not so much. My concern with part 2 is the tackling comes down to really the first part. It's when you're not quite sure where you're going to be, you're not in the right hole.
Sure.
You don't get there with the same force, the same timing. It is so much easier, Vince. You and I think you played defense also in high school, right? Like,
Yep,
I know
safety.
I played some defense my senior year. And when a running back can get a full head of steam and get in space, it's hard to, if that guy's any good, he may make you look bad every now and then. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And but when you are getting to that guy, as soon as he's making his cut, he doesn't have time to build up steam or make you miss. It's like he's going down, right? Guys are a lot easier to tackle when you get them before they get going. So that makes timing a very important thing. If you have certain guys, if you don't take the right angle to that guy, he's going to make you look bad. And so those are things that are youthful mistakes. I think some of the tackling last year was twofold. When JD had tackling issues, more often than not, it was one of two things. One is he either went too high, and JD did have a tendency to go too high, or his length was an issue. Yeah. Because he's not a real long guy.
Sure.
And so when he did have those problems, that was usually the reason why. And when you look at Marist, his issues were more about how do I say this? Not being in the right place at the right time. Right.
Not assignment sound.
Yeah. Not taking the right angle, things like that. It is ironic that last year, the game that JD and Marist, the game that they both had their season high in missed tackles was the same game. Can you guess who the opponent was and why I would want to be bringing this up? Think about who Notre Dame played. Yes.
Duke.
They both had 3 missed tackles against Duke. That was also where Benjamin Morrison had the most embarrassing miss of his career. Most of them were against the same dude. It's number 13, the guy that's now playing quarterback in Notre Dame, right?
Well, they got that going for him at least.
Why does that matter? One of the biggest problems that you have, the reason tackling's not as good as it used to be, is because you just don't tackle as much anymore.
Exactly. So true.
I mean, I was watching Ryan Roberts will love to hear this, right? I was watching the program last night. Right.
Oh, wow.
Somebody tweeted out the whole movie.
Really?
And so I I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I had it on my thing as I was
getting the whole movie?
Up. Yeah.
Wow, that doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. And I would assume that tweet has been since been taken down.
That's probably
But I was going to take advantage of it while it was up.
Yeah, I hear you.
And so I'm watching it, and it's just like there's that pair where they're just doing like Oklahomas.
Yeah.
And you're like, bro, like that's football we grew up with. Now I have much fonder memories of Oklahoma drills than you do, probably, because I was a quarterback. So most of my Oklahomas were handing off and watching. Ooh, look at that collision! I didn't have to be part of them. You know what I mean? So I liked them a whole lot more. But it was one of those things, Vince, where you're like, you just don't do that anymore. You don't tackle anymore.
No.
To a degree, I'm okay with it. To a degree, I'm not. There needs to be like more of a happy medium. But
sure.
Coaches are having to live in this new world, and a lot of us didn't grow up that way, and we have to find out new ways to do it. And Notre Dame staff, I think, is still learning that a little bit. And
sure.
And I thought they got better last year, finding different things to do. They do more tackling circuits now, where they are going to the ground with pads and other type of things, which is good. But it's one of those things where Vince, you have to figure out a way to get better at it. But I'm more concerned about it from the youthful standpoint. Because when you're a split second late getting to the hole against a Texas A&M linebacker, or running back, it may not be great for you. Same with the guys at Louisville, same with the guys at Florida State, Jamal Haynes at Georgia Tech, Woody Marks at USC, the Lawrence Tuafali who Florida State has. There's other guys, like if you're late to them, if you take a poor angle to them, they're going to make you look bad. And that stuff comes with youthfulness. And so that's why tackling to me is a bit of a concern there, because it's that. Like Drake Bowen's not going to have some of the same missed tackles that JD had because he just doesn't have the lack of length that JD had. Where Drew Tranquil ran into this a few times at Notre Dame as well, where he would go to make a tackle and guy would put his hand on his face and he just couldn't get to him because that guy had decent length and Drew had 31-inch arms, and he just couldn't get to a guy and he'd miss that tackle in the hole. And then you'd see Tavon Coney, who had much longer arms, would have that same thing happen, but Tavon could still get hands on the guy and make the tackle.
Right.
Drake and Kingston and Jalen Sneed won't have that same issue that JD had.
Sure.
Their issues are going to be more like Marist's, where you're not where you're supposed to be, or you're not taking the proper angle to where to get to the point of attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as they can, the faster they pick things up, the less mistakes like that they're going to make. That's going to be the key. And, what's funny is the guy that I thought, outside of Jack, the guy that's the best tackler that I've seen in practice as far as being in the right position is probably Jaden Alsbury. Because he's probably the most instinctive linebacker they have. Just smart, knows where to go. He's going to be more in space, so it's a little different animal for him out there in space. Those guys inside are really where a lot of my concerns are, and how are they going to do? There was a play last year, I think it was against Central Michigan, where Jalen Sneed came on a blitz and it was like, it's like a missile coming through the hole.
What?
But then doesn't come in balance.
Right.
Comes too high, and the running back makes him look bad.
Silly.
Just whiffs.
Yes.
Jalen Sneed, as a more veteran player, might come through the hole at the proper angle, meaning you don't come at that guy square to the inside because he's just going to back jump cut you outside. You come at that guy outside older end, because what's he going to do? Run into the quarterback or run back to where you have help, right? Those little things, like that 6-inch difference or that 6-inch change of proper angle is going to be the difference between you making a big play in the backfield or a guy making you look silly. Because Jalen Sneed didn't get juked in the backfield because he's not athletic. He's an exceptional athlete. It's because he didn't play with proper technique and didn't play at proper angle. Does Jalen Sneed make those plays this year or not? Right? That's where you hope the experience comes from. Same with JD. Or Drake and Kingston.
Sure.
Whereas JD always took the proper angle to those plays and just blew it up. Like there was that one play against USC where he kind of hits the quarterback and the running back at the same time, because he's like, because he knew where to go to where the running back couldn't escape. So the running back kind of ran back into the quarterback, and JD is able to make that play. Those are the things that you hope that these guys can eliminate as quickly as possible and not have a lot of those big mistakes. Because not only does it limit the bad plays, Vince, but the bigger thing is it's going to enhance the big plays.
Oh, sure.
And we talked a lot about this defense. Finish better. That's very true at the linebacker position. And it's going to determine a lot of okay, are they going to be able to make enough plays to nullify maybe some of the technical mistakes they're going to make, or assignment mistakes they're going to make. That part right there is going to be the key to that.
Yeah, and turning mistakes into big plays too. You know what I mean? Because a slight mistake in the past has meant a big play, but a slight mistake now, because of the athleticism and things of that nature, could turn into a big play for Notre Dame, as opposed to giving up a big play. Right? The margin of error is larger than I think it has been in the past at linebackers. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like, not that you want to keep erring, but I just think the margin of error is a little bit bigger
because of the lack of experience.
Right.
Once that gets rectified with experience, by playing more,
right?
Because I hate to break it to y'all, but there's really only one way to fix inexperience, and it's to
play.
Gain experience by playing.
100%.
That's why I always love coaches that never play certain guys. Well, he doesn't have enough experience. Well, whose fault is that? You're the one that chooses to play him or not. But once that's rectified, then I actually think it's the opposite. I think that the margin for error is even the margin for error slides to advantage 2024.
Yeah.
Once the mental part gets out, because you do have longer, more athletic, physical.
Right. Yep. And that's what I was saying.
Yep. Yeah. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, for sure.
With you.
The last part we want to talk about in this segment is the pass rush, which I think is a very interesting and under-analyzed part of this linebacking core. These guys, and you mentioned like Jalen Sneed, for example, right? And we've been told, and we've seen with our own eyes, he just looks more comfortable this year than he's looked in a really long time. And he's the type of player that ever. Good call.
Because he's been at Notre Dame. Because even in high school, Jalen just got by on God-given freaky athleticism, because he had to play. I mean, his head coach, God love him, because he was so better than everybody else. He had to play him everywhere.
Yeah.
He played quarterback, running back, defensive end, linebacker, safety. I mean, they didn't move that kid all over the field.
Right.
So Jalen was never given the opportunity to learn a position. That's not a fault of Coach Payne. That's what you do when you have great players.
Hey, 100%.
Is you look, I'm going to use this guy as a weapon. But
especially
when you just talk about strictly projecting to the next level, it can create some. You've got a longer road to track, right, to get to where you need to get to. Where a guy who played Mike his whole career and is learning, is able to make a faster transition.
Well, and that's the point that I was going to make about Jalen, is that when he's comfortable and he comes downhill really, really well. It's just when he doesn't really know what he's doing, and then he hesitates, and you can't really use him in a manner that you might want to use him. But this year could be a lot different. I was just using him as an example of a way that you could use him in a pass rush. But the way these guys are with their athleticism and with their athletic ability and all of that, you can use them with the pass rush this year.
This is what I would say, Vince, to your point, and I agree with you. This linebacking core should be even better as pass rushers than last year's group.
Right.
Should be. Based on what you're talking about, talent.
Yeah.
Drake is explosive downhill. Maybe he's not the side-to-side guy that other guys are, but downhill, Drake gets after it. Kingston can get after it. We saw that in one-on-ones. Kingston has a knack for winning. Like, they were putting him over guards in one-on-ones in practice, and he was beating them. He's got a knack for it. Jalen Sneed athletically should be an outstanding pass rusher. Jaden Alsbury, if you're not, they're going to bring him off the edge.
Sure.
They just will in some of those nickel and base defense looks. Jack Kaiser is a pretty athletic guy. He should be a good pass rusher. We haven't seen him do it a whole lot as an inside guy, but he has the tools to be so. But can they do it? Like, the talent's there, but we just haven't seen this group of guys really do a whole lot when it comes to the pass rush. Look, Jack last year had 12 pressures and Jalen Seed had 12 pressures. They had 7 combined hits on the quarterback. They had 2 sacks. Well, if you look at their pass rushes combined, they had 123 total pass rushes. Marist had 129. So Marist had 25 pressures on 129 snaps. These guys had 123. That's almost identical numbers for your 2 wills. If you look at Marist, he had 9 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. This is according to Pro Football Focus. These 2 kids had 9 combined. So on 6 fewer total pass rush opportunities than what Marist had. So, like, you should see it, but when you also look at it, Vince, it's like, yeah, but those aren't a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
We haven't seen them do that actually a lot. Drake Bowen only had 11 pass rush opportunities last year. That's it. Right. Now, here's the good news. He had 3 pressures in those 11 opportunities. So if you actually look at it and you take his 3 pressures and you divide it by the number of total pressures he had, and then multiply it towards the number of pressures that J.D. Bertrand had, Drake Bowen would have had 28 pressures last year. J.D. Bertrand had 30. So it's right. So the per snap stuff is good, but that's not always how football works, Vince. You can't always replicate. Well, if you give the guy 100, it's like, remember the year that Dexter Williams averaged 9 yards a carry, and everybody's like, why don't you play him more? Well, the next year they did play him more, and Dexter was still a very explosive running back, but he was like 6.5 yards a carry, which is very good. He only was at 9 per carry the year before because he only had 30-some carries, and when you have one long run on 30-some carries, your yards per carry average is going to be very high. It just doesn't always work that way where you multiply it times this, and you give Jack Kaiser the same amount of snaps that Marist had last year. It doesn't mean he's going to have way more pressures.
Right.
If you look at Jack's production on a per snap basis, he had 12 pressures last year on 40 pass rush attempts. That's it. If you take that towards what Marist had last year, the number of snaps, Jack would have had 39 pressures compared to Marist's 25. Well, there's 2 problems with that. Number one is most of Jack's pressures came off the edge. You're just going to have, when you're just coming off the edge, you're going to have a greater opportunity for getting a pressure. Number 2, again, we don't know how he's going to do that on a more permanent basis.
Right.
As an inside guy with 200 extra snaps under his belt, right? So it is a question mark. I will say this. I'm excited about this group as pass rushers. I think that they've got a chance to be very disruptive, not just on getting pressure on the quarterback, but it's a much longer group outside of Jack Kaiser than it was last year. And I'd be curious to see what Jack Kaiser's length is compared to J.D. Bertrand's. I'm very curious to see that because I think Jack looks about a half an inch to an inch taller than J.D.
Yeah.
Just visually, he looks taller than J.D., but not by a ton.
Sure.
J.D. was a little thicker than Jack is. But Jack looks a tad longer than JD. Like here, Jalen Sneed is only 6'1.5", but he's got very long arms.
Yeah.
Drake is 6'2.5" with long arms. Kingston 6'3" with long arms. And height to me matters a lot more for a linebacker when it comes to breaking up passes. Height plus length, right? Because if I have 31-inch arms and I'm 6'3", I'm going to get a lot higher than a guy that's 5'11" with 31-inch arms, right? I mean, that's just, I'm not the smartest guy in the world when it comes to math, but I can figure that one out, right?
That's math.
And so you've got longer, taller linebackers that are athletic. The disruptions aren't just going to be getting to the quarterback. You hope that they're also quarterbacks trying to throw hot. You get your hands up,
right?
More tip passes.
Yeah.
I think this group has a chance to be really dynamic as pass rushers, but that is 100%. Let me rephrase. That's 95% of projection. Because the things that we're gonna see them asked to do this year as pass rushers is going to be completely different than what they were asked to do last year. That's going to be the key. But it's a question mark for now. But it's one of those question marks that you look and say,
I like where
if they're as good as I think they're going to be, this could end up being a strength of this team and allow them. And then, of course, if the D line's as good as we think too, and these guys are going to get more run through lanes,
right?
There's going to be some big hits on running backs and quarterbacks this year if the D-line's as good as we hope it's going to be.
We got one more section to get to, but before we do, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and also jump onto the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Lots of good stuff over there. Always has been, always will be, and it only gets better when you join. So make sure you make that happen.